To our top story, Ukraine, there have been a few developments on the country's badly needed financial rescue plan.
Yeah, that's right. There was a warning earlier this week that Ukraine needed €5 billion by tomorrow, in fact, to avoid running out of cash. The IMF says it's ready to step in with emergency funding, but it needs an official request from the Ukraine to get that, to put in place that emergency plan, which of course can't happen until the government is firmly in place. There had been speculation over what role Russia would play in that rescue plan, though, but comments from a finance ministry official today saying they will participate in a rescue plan at the IMF. They won't stand aside, is the quote from that official. Russia's economy, of course, very closely linked to Ukraine's. It's probably one of the reasons they're so interested in keeping the country afloat. Its banks are particularly heavily exposed, to the tune of $28 billion, it's estimated by the ratings agency Fitch. Three main banks have massive investments in Ukraine. You can see the proportions of those banks invested in the Ukraine. There are three major Russian banks, up to 30% in the case of Bank. So really is a very important connection for them, and a Ukrainian default could have massive consequences for Russia as well.
Of course. Well, let's move on to some company news now from Australia. The airline Qantas is known as the flying kangaroo, but it's not really flying at the moment, is it?
No, not flying terribly high anyway. The company is going to cut 5,000 more jobs after reporting half-year losses of around $225 million. Now, the figure compares to a profit of almost $200 million for the same period in 2012. Now, the Qantas has been struggling with increased competition and has called on the government to relax capital rules to allow new investment into the airline. Oliver Farry has more.
It's not the first time Qantas has cut jobs, but this time it particularly hurts. The Australian airline posted losses of €164 million in the final quarter of 2013. Now Qantas is getting ready to offload 15% of its workforce.
This performance by our airlines is unacceptable, and the current position is unsustainable. Today, I regret to announce that we will be reducing our employee numbers by the equivalent of 5,000 full-time staff over the next 3 years.
Just over a year ago, Qantas was turning a profit, but it is stretched thin trying to maintain its share of Australia's domestic market. Qantas is hoping to persuade the Australian government that it is deserving of public funds to help service its debt. Its financing is hampered by a strong Australian dollar, high fuel prices and the Qantas Sales Act, which limits foreign investment to 49%.
Qantas is doing its best to put its own house in order, and this government will do what it can to ensure that it has a level playing field on which to compete.
The government is unwilling to hand out subsidies, but it wants to reform the Act. It faces opposition, though, from Labour and the Greens. The Australian public is divided.
Difficult decision, but I do think we could help Qantas out as a government, could help Qantas out a bit.
The airline hopes to save up to €1.3 billion over the next 3 years and consequently attract new investors.
OK, so Stephen, what's all that news done to Qantas's share price?
As you can imagine, not terribly impressed investors. Qantas share price down 9% in Sydney today. In fact, the entire benchmark index in Sydney down almost by 0.5%. That's the S&P ASX 200 you can see there. A brighter picture in China, though, it has to be said, after recent days' losses. This after the central bank allowed the currency to appreciate somewhat after a week of losses. Here in Europe, despite the ongoing worries about the political situation in Ukraine, European shares opening reasonably flat, no great gains or losses across the board. The insurance group RSA, one of the big fallers in London after poor results, and announcing a call for new investment from shareholders. Just a quick eye on Spain as well, new data there showing the country's economy contracted by 1.2% in 2013, which is slightly less than the previous year. It's a slightly more optimistic picture.
OK, well, there is a lot of company news around today. Do take us through the highlights.
Yeah, we'll start with the Royal Bank of Scotland, which has announced losses of £8.5 billion or €10 billion for 2013. It suffered from restructuring costs and various regulatory fines. Now, it's the sixth successive year of losses at the bank, which is 81% owned by the UK government. RBS will still pay out around €700 million in bonuses, though down about 15% on last year. That's hit their shares in trading in London this morning. They're down around 4%. The French energy company GDF Suez has reported a net loss of €9.4 billion for last year. The company wiped out its profits with a €15 billion write-down over what it sees as a demand crisis in Europe's energy market. The firm's CEO says the situation, which has seen prices fall to new lows, is serious and long-lasting. And revenues at Martin Searle's advertising firm WPP rose by 3.5% last year. Like-for-like revenues were up by almost 6% in January. The results put WPP ahead of its French rival Publicis, which missed earnings targets because of slowing revenue towards the end of last year. Investors not too impressed though, their shares down around 6% after announced a currency buyback plan.
OK, now, Stephen, I have to say, I don't normally go in for gadget news, but you've got news of one very James Bond-esque gadget being developed, strangely enough, by Boeing, the airplane maker.
Unlikely name, but Boeing have developed a phone which will delete all of its call and message data if it's tampered with. It was being developed in secret, but the details have been made available because of a regulatory filing made in the United States. Boeing's targeting those security-conscious customers, particularly those from government agencies. The tamper-proof seal means that if that's opened, it will automatically delete the software and data on the phone. Not completely out of character for Boeing, has to be said, though they do provide the communications devices for Air Force One, so they have some experience in this area.
Well, there you go. Secret competencies in spying. It's all coming out now, isn't it? Thanks very much, Stephen Carroll, with the business news. We're going to turn our attention to what's making headlines in the international press with Florence Vilmino. Hello there.
Hi, Catherine.
We're going to start off with events in Ukraine, quite fast moving.